So thank you, Enrico, for organizing this. So my talk is called The Self-Revelation of Creation, Preparing the Way for an Interreligious Choice. To begin, I would like to elucidate my use of the adjective religious. I do not mean to make a strict distinction between religious and interreligious philosophy. By saying interreligious, I merely want to stress the fact that any religious philosophizing is at the same time 1 foot inside and 1 foot outside of a concrete religious tradition. What I have in mind is in many ways similar to what was once called natural theology. But because I do not think that human beings possess an ahistorical, rational faculty that guarantees a certain set of natural or inborn knowledge about God, I prefer not to use this term. Be that as it may, in my case, philosophizing is driven by theological concerns. As religion is nowadays often seen as a threat to the autonomy of reason, and by extension of philosophy, this endeavor is often met with suspicion. Religious insights defy empirical verification. They can be called interpretations, provided that we do not understand an interpretation as a one-directional projection of a certain set of ideas into an indifferent world. Furthermore, the fact that the starting point is a particular historical religion, it is inevitable that every step on one's philosophical path will bear the stamp of a concrete, historically conditioned intellectual constellation. It is necessary to determine a place for interreligious dialogue from within and find the golden mean between universality and particularity. It is an enterprise which should not smooth over the inevitable tension that lies at the heart of any religious philosophy. So the religion from which one starts determines the specificities of the conceptual space wherein an interreligious dialogue takes place. Since I think from a Christian perspective, the idea of creation is of crucial importance. In contrast to the Deuteronomic insistence on the exclusivity of the covenant, the Torah, the Hebrew Bible's wisdom literature, shows a surprising willingness to appropriate ideas from neighboring cultures such as Egypt. While the reception history of these texts, even within the Old Testament itself, testify to a gradual merging of wisdom and the covenant, such as, for instance, already in the apocryphal book, The Wisdom of Jesus Sirach, and the quote from Rabbi Menahem Nahum of Chernobyl, which was one of the first disciples of the Baal Shem Tov of the Hasidic movement. The texts themselves do not necessitate such a reading. So if we allow the possibility of a wisdom inherent in creation, a creaturely wisdom that reveals itself in and through creation, as Gerhard von Rath suggests is the case in, for instance, the 8th chapter of Proverbs and the 28th chapter of Job, we are presented, I believe, with the opportunity to delineate a space within reality that allows us to fruitfully integrate other points of view within our own horizon of understanding. I start my reflections by drawing on the thought of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. In his unfinished book, Ethics, he introduces the notions of the ultimate and the penultimate. The ultimate is not a theory, but an event, the justification of the sinner by grace alone. As event, it can never be fully grasped conceptually. It has to be lived and realized. Everything that precedes and succeeds this event is what Bonhoeffer calls the penultimate. Briefly put, the penultimate concerns being human and being good. It is my conviction that while the ultimate reveals the penultimate as the ultimate, it is not an inventory of information which teaches us in an exhaustive manner about the penultimate. Historicity is part and parcel of human nature, which implies that there have been, throughout the ages and across different cultures, different authentic manifestations of being human and being good. The possibility exists that even if we allow the thought that the ultimate has only been revealed in Christ, certain aspects of being human remained underdeveloped in Christianity. So for the sake of the ultimate, it is imperative to retain an openness to the world. Otherwise, we run the risk of turning our own Western expression of the penultimate into a precondition for the ultimate. We can thus say that because the penultimate must be preserved for the sake of the ultimate, so does the dignity of other religions and cultures for the sake of the penultimate. The task of preserving the penultimate is what Bonhoeffer calls preparing the way for the word. We must never lose sight of the fact that the penultimate is ultimately grounded in the ultimate, never the other way around. The balance between the penultimate and the ultimate can easily go astray. Bonhoeffer distinguishes two forms of error. A one-sided stress on the ultimate leads to radicalism, while a one-sided stress on the penultimate results in compromise. Radicalism sees only continuity between the penultimate and the ultimate and rejects everything worldly. Compromise construes the relation between the penultimate and the ultimate as mere continuity, by which the ultimate serves as a justification of the penultimate. In truth, there is a continuity in discontinuity. The relationship between the ultimate and the penultimate is resolved only in Christ, Bonhoeffer writes. But is it necessary to identify the ultimate exclusively with the historical person of Jesus of Nazareth? One thinker who wrestled with this question is Katsumi Takizawa. In his thought, he does not speak of Jesus Christ, but of Emmanuel, God with us. Emmanuel is the absolutely formless and infinite subject, which is and acts through itself and in itself. We stand in a twofold relation to Emmanuel, a primary and a secondary contact. I quote, "At the ground of human being is a decision, a determination, quite different from human will and action, quite different from any activity in this world. This is what I call the arch decision, the primary contact between God and man, which is at the same time the boundary between them. Everything human beings think and do is a response or a self-decision to the address that lies at the ground of our existence, an address that is rooted in the unconditional meeting of God with man. If we fail to respond adequately to its call, we become inhumane." We live in the illusion that we owe our humanity to ourselves. Despite this forgetfulness, humaneness remains a genuine possibility because the creative call of the Creator never ceases being active. Awakening to the arch fact is what Takizawa calls the secondary contact. What I call the contact of God with man, in the secondary sense, is the awakening to the fact which lies at the bottom of self-being, the awakening to what is alive there and acts there. It is to see what is there from the beginning, but what was never thought of, to see it in such a way that both man himself and the world are changed. In Christianity, of course, the secondary contact is called faith. And in Bonhoeffer's words, faith means to find, hold to, and cast my anchor on this foundation, and so to be held by it. Faith means to base life on a foundation outside of myself, on an eternal and holy foundation, on Christ. Faith means to be captivated by the gaze of Jesus Christ. One sees nothing but him. Faith means to be torn out of imprisonment in one's own ego, liberated by Jesus Christ. Faith is letting something happen, and only therein is it an activity. So faith does not add something to our life, but clarifies the relation to the activity that lies at the bottom of our existence. An activity that is at work extra nos, everywhere, at all times, and without distinction. The insight that the arch decision remains at work, regardless of our attitude towards it, lies at the heart of Bonhoeffer's preoccupation with preserving the penultimate, which is ultimately an act of repentance. The creative call that proceeds from the arch decision resounds throughout the whole of creation. Human beings share their primary contact to the arch decision with the world, and they can learn from it. I quote from the book of Job. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. To determine and clarify the manifold ways in which this primary contact manifests itself is a task for religious philosophy. Even if we remain in the dark concerning the whence and whither of creation, that is, the understanding of creation as creation, we cannot evade being confronted by the workings of the arch decision. The mystery of the world is not limited to its coming into existence, its origin. The conditioned lives continually out of the unconditioned, which guarantees its existence as an interconnected whole. We experience the world not only through its parts, but also as a totality of which we are part. In the book of Proverbs, we find the following sentence: ears that hear and eyes that see, the Lord has made them both. I would like to gloss this proverb by quoting Hannah Arendt out of her citations from her book, The Life of the Mind. In this world which we enter, appearing from a nowhere, and from which we disappear into a nowhere, being and appearing coincide. Seen from the perspective of the world, every creature born into it arrives well equipped to deal with a world in which being and appearing coincide. They are fit for worldly existence. Living beings, men and animals, are not just in the world, they are of the world. And this is precisely because they are subjects and objects, perceiving and being perceived at the same time. What is of particular interest is that in the proverb, hearing takes precedence over seeing. The activity of hearing is far more dependent on the initiative of the world than its sight. Through seeing, we can move, but it is first and foremost through hearing that we are moved. If being and appearing coincide, means that intelligibility belongs to the fabric of reality. Through language, appearing becomes itself an appearance in the world. Speech brings the meaningfulness of the world to light. God created the world through his word. He called it into existence, and it is through his continual creative address that creation is preserved. As George Steiner wrote, it is the Hebraic intuition that God is capable of all speech acts except that of monologue, which has generated our arts of reply, of questioning and counter-creation. Through its intelligibility, the world draws us outside of ourselves. Intelligibility implies orderliness, and orderliness implies the existence of a totality. The creation of the whole is both temporally simultaneous, yet ontologically prior to, and therefore to be distinguished from, the parts. To speak of creation is to speak of it as a totality. One of the core ideas of Gerhard von Raad's groundbreaking book, Weisheit in Israel, is the notion of the self-revelation of creation. In Takizawa's terminology, the self-revelation of creation, expressed through the notion of wisdom, is the universe's response to the call of the arch decision. Any mention of creation in the Old Testament is usually in the form of a hymn, which is fitting since creation itself continually praises its creator. A consequence of the poetic style is, of course, a lack of conceptual clarity. There is no uniform concept of wisdom in the Old Testament. Sometimes it is an attribute of Yahweh, sometimes it seems to be created, and sometimes it refers to human wisdom. For my purposes, I will focus on the wisdom that is embedded within creation and its relation to human beings. The two most important biblical passages are the 8th chapter of Proverbs and the 28th chapter of Job. I start with Job. In Job, the ambiguity of our relation to wisdom comes to the fore. The poem begins with a reference to a mine. Human beings have achieved a technological excellence that's and human beings have even succeeded in subduing mountains. So people assault a flinty rock with their hands and lay bare the roots of the mountains. They tunnel through the rock. Their eyes see all its treasures. They search the sources of the rivers and bring hidden things to light. The subduing of a mountain, the excavation of, or the subduing of a mountain takes on additional significance if we keep in mind the significance mountains have played in the history of humankind. The importance of Mount Fuji in Japanese culture is a case in point. The world depicted in Job is thoroughly de-divinized. Only Yahweh deserves to be worshipped. Yet it would be wrong to see this as similar to our secularized view of the world. Job's world is neither sacred nor profane. It is and remains God's work, permeated with divine activity. Despite humanity's tremendous achievements, the question remains, where can wisdom be found? Wisdom is not something we have at our disposal, and it would be foolish to presume that we can find wisdom by simply digging deeper inside the mountain. God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells, for he views the end of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. And he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, and he made a decree for the rain and the path for the thunderstorm. Then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. Wisdom belongs to creation, albeit in a mysterious way. Even though it is closely connected to the world we encounter every day, we do not seem to know what it is or where it resides. In the 8th chapter of Proverbs, this mystery does not longer reside far from human beings, but actively seeks us. It addresses us and wishes us to heed its call. The mysteriousness of wisdom reaches new heights. Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud, "To you, O people, I call out. I raise my voice to all mankind." No longer does the text speak about wisdom. No, it is wisdom herself that speaks. Wisdom raises her voice to all mankind. She makes no distinction. She loves whoever loves her. Note that wisdom wants to be loved for her own sake. There is no direct reference to Yahweh. She wants to be as intimate with humankind as she is with her Creator. For those who heed her call, she is as a tree of life and a source of happiness, which is quite a bold statement from one who is, after all, only a creature. And now the last biblical citation. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was formed long ages ago, at the very beginning when the world came to be. Then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world, and delighting in mankind. This beautiful passage presents us the image of a playful, childlike wisdom, delighting in its nearness to the Creator and rejoicing over the richness of his creation. As the first work, there is undoubtedly nothing divine about wisdom, but what kind of creature is she? In the hymn, wisdom herself seems to invite us to join her in her delight, and to be near to wisdom is to be near to God. Love, not pure disinterested knowledge, is the way towards wisdom. The world in which we are born and live addresses us. That seems to be the message of the wisdom literature. But we also find a similar idea in Shintoism, as interpreted by Motoori Norinaga. The intelligibility of the world is saturated with pathos. We do not merely know things, we are also moved by them and through them. Human beings can know mono no aware, the pathos of things. All living things sing, and their heart, or kokoro, is moved and responds to their song. The purest expression of our being moved is through poetry. Poetry is an action performed when one is overwhelmed by mono no aware. The composers of the biblical hymns to wisdom were not simply moved by this or that particular song, but by the song of the whole. This song they called wisdom. The notion of song, uta in Japanese, in Norinaga fits nicely with the importance of listening in the Old Testament. Von Raad writes, constitutive for man's humanity is the faculty of hearing. If he is not constantly listening to the order established by God, then he is lost. We need to listen constantly. Being human is a task imposed on us. Forms of life that once promoted well-being might become a means for oppression if it is conserved for its own sake. Wisdom is the ability to distinguish between the natural and unnatural use of freedom. How is the natural recognized? Bonhoeffer asks. The natural is that form of life preserved by God for the fallen world that is directed toward justification, salvation, and renewal through Christ. In this presentation, I have tried to understand more concretely and from a Christian point of view a remark that Franz Rosenzweig wrote in his essay Das Neue Denken. Theological problems want to be translated into human problems, while human problems want to be driven into the theological. I am far from certain whether my attempt to open up the biblical message to the world is successful. It's been more an experiment for me. So I hope I can get some constructive or maybe destructive criticism from you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can start questions and discussion, and also the people connected per Zoom. Don't hesitate. Simply turn your microphone on and interact with us. So please.
Well, you've taken us into the heart of the matter, and it's very hard to, of course, to grasp that. The Proverbs 8 that you quoted, of course, it's a famous text for the idea of the divine logos, eternal logos.
Yeah, in Christianity, it has.
What would you say to that?
But in Christianity, it has been connected, and similar to how in the texts or the citation of the Hasidic movement, it has connected to the Torah. In Christianity, it's connected to Christ, the divine logos. But Van Rad's point is that it's not a divine hypostasis that is here in the text. It's a creature. And so there's should be made a distinction, but it addresses all humankind, so it's not exclusive, as in the sense of the am I answering a question? Your question?
The logos is universal too, right? It is addressed to all, right?
Yes, but it's not cut. It's not cut. It's connected with Christ. But if the creature, if with the wisdom is a creature and it expresses creation, it's not. It does not to be understood or to respond to it. Does not necessitate knowledge about.
But we didn't bring in Christ because Philo of Alexandria talks a lot about the Logos. He didn't know anything about Christ by definition. But did he ever quote Proverbs? Probably not. Philo.
Yeah, I know of his work and that the Logos play an important role. I'm not sure which. Well, there's already a shift in the wisdom of Solomon that connects the Logos with the divinity. It becomes more like the Platonic world, soul, or Logos. But there is a similarity, but I think the subtle distinction is that the wisdom of the self-revelation of creation is just part of creation. It's not, so it's between creation and God, but not a divine hypostasis. So I still have to think about the concrete implications, but I find it an interesting because it also makes it less dependent on a specific religious context, because you can say that a lot of the different religions, or like Confucianism, Buddhism, also respond to meaningful things to say about this creaturely wisdom without having to of course they don't conceptualize it as being part of creation, because creation is connected to the Judeo tradition, but yes, so even if you eliminate the thought of a monotheistic personal God, the address of wisdom itself can still be meaningful, I think.
You quoted Gerhard von Rad, and you mentioned a book earlier. I don't know. Wasn't the name of the book again Wisdom in Creation or something?
Weisheit in Israel.
Wisdom in Israel. Yeah. But are you sure that wisdom is just a creaturely thing in the Israelite view? You know, what you quoted there from Job, even. Is it really just in creation, or is it a divine presence in creation?
Well, there are multiple, even within the Old Testament, there are multiple shades of meaning to wisdom, because in Psalm 104, it says God created in wisdom, so which also implies or directly connects wisdom to God. But then again, in the 8th chapter of Proverbs, the Old Testament is a very complex book, and I find it interesting that there are different traditions present, which of course in its reception history becomes merged in Christianity. it becomes connected with the divine logos or with Christ. In the rabbinical tradition, it is identified with the Torah. So I thought it was interesting to take a look at that strand, that tradition in, well, not isolation, but if there's a possibility to develop it in a maybe new way within an intercultural dialogue. But
I'm trying to do that at the moment. I'm writing about the Nicene Creed in interreligious perspective, which really goes back to the Johannine Logos, an interreligious perspective. And you know that in the 4th century, the text that they wrote most about was Proverbs 8, because the Arians said, you see, Christ is Christon, he's created. And Athanasius said, you can't say that. We don't mean created as one of the creatures. He's not poieton, he's Christon, he's created, not made. And Athanasius said, sorry, that distinction doesn't work. You must say with St. John that he is God. Well, yes, he is God, but not the God. Theos, but not Theos. And Athanasius again said, no, he is Alethenos Theos, true God. True God from true God, which is what the Nicene Creed says. So how does that all connect with your brother kind of mystical? I think Yoko will say something about it.
I don't know, but I think that that's the right way to look at the problem, is that there's an intrinsic ambiguity in the biblical text for wisdom, right? Which can be considered a creature, but is also a Christic figure. So when you say in the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, that wisdom was created before every other creature, I mean, you can interpret this in a temporal way, but also in a metaphysical way, right? In order to put wisdom in a place which is not a created place. The one thing that the Bible does, I think, precisely is a refusal to postulate an intermediary ontology between created and uncreated. So there's no place for an intermediate ontology, right? There's no mediation of something which is a bit created, a bit uncreated. So I think there's really, a total difference, right?
In the Bible or in Christian interpretation of the Bible?
I think in the Bible.
Well,
I think it's in the Bible.
Philo, you have that very mysterious logos. He's the powers of God. It's not quite clear if the logos is created or uncreated.
I think it's an interpretation is not legitimate. So it's not a legitimate interpretation of the Bible. I think it's way to postulate an intermediate ontology, because it's if you want, it is a rationalizing way to see the problem. An easy way to solve a problem, like to postulate something which is intermediate between created and uncreated.
Right, but
It seems to imitate, for example, a solution of Neoplatonism.
Exactly. It's a Platonistic reading. Philo was Platonistic,
Yeah, sure.
and the early fathers before Nicaea were heavily weighted in Platonistic direction.
So you come up with interpretation, see the logos.
No,
The logos
the interpretation of that context, in the interpretation, I do not believe to be biblical.
Okay, but I was just trying
His interpretation, according to me, there's an intermediate ontology between the uncreated and the
the
created, right?
interpretation of the logos.
Yes.
Okay.
But the logos should be something intermediate between the created.
You have a great divinity, the true God, and the logos was God. John says, but he doesn't say the true God. He says, this is Origen, greatest theologian before Nicaea, very much differentiates between the true God, which is utterly transcendent, and even far transcendent of the Logos. The Logos is divine. It's theos. It's not theos. And what does that? How do you translate that? Theos. You can't say it's not theos, which means divine. It's an adjective. It's a noun. So the Logos is God, but not the God. And that's that's the most powerful ontology of the 3rd century. And the crisis of early Christian Platonism in the Arian crisis before Nicaea forced the church to say, no, the Logos is God from God, true God from true God. You know, that means there is nothing intermediate between God and creation in terms of being. It's a quite a drastic event, really, in Christianity for a Nicene moment. And of course, when we say the Logos is something like the Tao, Chinese Tao, we're in many 19th century missionaries say kind of, or the Logos is something like the Dharmakaya, you know, and Henri de Lubac would say something like that. But what are we saying? It's not so easy, you know. That's easy. I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to know your response to all that.
Well, yeah, my response to it's a quite difficult question. Well, okay.
You might have to the silence of humanity.
So, Jim, there are no questions from Zoom.
I think this was very bold, what you did today, and I think Joseph is right that you touched on a really important question. I would like to come at it from a little different angle, maybe a little more antagonistic. Excuse me. So
No,
just to
please.
push this. I understand that you want to see the overlap between philosophy and religious thinking in the Bible, and to show that in fact philosophy and religious thinking flow into one another. You need a foot in each in order to get the idea of what it is to be human, what it is to be good. And the Bible gives a good example of that, the wisdom literature and creation literature. I think also my reading behind this is your concern with the theologian you're studying, Lugstrup, who wasn't really a full philosopher and he wasn't a full theologian. He found a kind of middle ground between. And you need to justify that and to find that it actually works. My problem is the logic of what you did. I think it doesn't work for philosophy as neatly as it works for religious philosophy or philosophy coming from a religious standpoint. Let me explain what I mean. Of course, the most abstract, biggest place to begin is to say that both philosophical thinking and religious thinking are concerned with the ultimate. That's undeniable. But I think when I just look at the argument and the way it flowed, it seemed to me that it was an argument for intelligent design. That is to say, philosophy pursues its thought, it reaches a certain limit in its penultimateness, and it requires the ultimacy that religious thinking can give it, that philosophy can't give itself. Now, let me go on to explain this a little bit. You said that that penultimate is grounded in the ultimate, not the other way around.
Well, that's what Bonhoeffer was.
Yes, okay. Yes.
So,
But, this is by definition in the abstract. There's no way to refute that. What could possibly argue against the fact that the ultimate is the ground of the penultimate? First of all, we have to give those concepts content. And then we'd have, I mean, there's no place you can stand. So Let me put it another way. So what's the difference between the ultimate and the desire that there be an ultimate? From human beings who live in a penultimate world, as you call it, or an incomplete world, a world that's not understood, only intelligent. Okay? What's the difference between the desire for an ultimate and an ultimate? If you only speak of desire, then of course everything ultimate is penultimate. But we say, yeah, but this can't be all there is. There's this great darkness, but this great darkness must be some kind of a reality. There must be some kind of a unity to it. There must be some kind of a design. But where can you stand to say that? I can see that you say, I would like there to be an ultimate. I would like everything not to be fully relative. I would like reality to be one, but that's a whole. That's a desire. It's a we. There's no place you can stand to defend that. And the more abstract it is in the saying, the least useful it is for working out what we call ultimate questions in philosophy. So, say that this intelligibility implies that there's an order. No, it doesn't imply there's an. It assumes there's an. But if we see intelligibility as inexhaustibly intelligible, then it doesn't apply in order anymore. You can jump to a leap of faith if you want, to take the step over into religious thinking and say, yes, there's an order. And I believe that there's an order. But there's no place you can stand to defend that, and no place you can stand to refute it. So the question is then, where does philosophy lead to religion? At the desire not to be frustrated, at the desire that everything isn't just penultimate, at the hope that there's really some kind of an ultimate? Yes, belief in an ultimate plan, an ultimate design, a creation, which we get little glimpses of, and which wisdom pushes us to believe is finally one great unified reality. So my problem is that it doesn't, for me, it doesn't work unless you begin from a standpoint of religious faith in an ultimate reality, call it whatever you want. That the overlap between philosophy and theology is really controlled by theology. Your 2 feet are really in theology here, not in philosophy at all. That's just my question. And I said I would be antagonistic because I wanted to be a little bit exaggerating in order to push you.
No, I agree with your criticism, and it's like I said, it was an experiment. I'm not completely convinced with my argument itself, but that's the difficulty of, well, the ultimate is not a theory, so it's like maybe I'm also a constraint because of my theological preference for Luther and Lutheran tradition, which is quite hostile to philosophy. So that's an additional struggle for me. I don't know if there is, from the sources I want to draw on, if there is any suitable way to go, or whether I should not shift my or change my sources. So, but yes, it's the ultimate is of course well, it's more theological than philosophical today, of course, and it presumes a religious faith, because I try to come out of theology, come out of Christianity, and because the difference between the penultimate and the ultimate is of course only meaningful within a religion or within Christianity, as you said, and that's the struggle between the universality and the particularity of the Christian message, right? And so it's, in a way, of course, you can just go along with and that's also Luxem's problem with a lot of existentialist theology. You can go with the flow of the modern religious view of the world and then just say, yeah, religion, it's a decision, a leap. But at the same time, he tries to give a more religious interpretation. There is no necessity to interpret the world as creation. There is no empirical verification. So there's always a decision for an interpretation. But yeah, there's a lot of your critical points I just don't have an answer to. Yeah, so sorry for that.
Someone in Zoom who want to join the discussion? Okay, so we can go on inside the room. I think the next one is Felipe and Coco.
Yeah, I think what people on Zoom are thinking. So thank you very much, man. I think it was very interesting. And I think I understand Jim's point because it looks to me that you're coming, of course, from a religious standpoint and then trying to find like how to communicate, right? Like religion and philosophy in this subject. And so for me, for example, it was very interesting when you used Arendt, for example. It was a very interesting point that I wasn't expecting to show up during the presentation. So I think it was very interesting. So I think maybe I'm just trying to complement something that James saying. I don't want to sound like, how do you say, like Eraso or anything like that, right? But I think maybe we can find, or you can find some other points or other philosophers who deal with this idea of the ultimate, and maybe even find something that we can understand as a penultimate, you know, like in order to like establish a more because like Jim was saying, like I really felt the same, like that we were with both feet on religion, and then maybe one hand on philosophy when you're talking about it. So maybe I was thinking, just to say some names, but I was thinking about, for example, something in Thomas Aquinas or Augustine, and that pretty sure you can find something, especially because before both of you were talking about Platonist interpretation of logos and how it influenced philosophy as well. So I think it's a very interesting topic that we can develop. So thank you. That's just my compliments. I compliment, I compliment.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I'm just curious how you think Motoori as the counterpoint. There was another thinker that's just right after him, Hirata Satsune, who was much more. It sounded like Hirata was he was concerned with the Old Testament and the place of God as it appears. So it seems like that would be a much more natural fit to your framework.
Yes, well, of course, Norinaga is one of the more famous names, and a lot of my energy goes into exploring all different thinkers. And there's, of course, the limitation language barrier of Japanese and my inability to read it. And my reason for including it is mainly because of the poetic character of the Old Testament, and the fact that it's there's something in that like wisdom is also there's something poetical about wisdom, and so they express their being overwhelmed by wisdom by means of hymns, and the Old Testament writes about creation. It's also creation sings praise also, and there's the poetical connection between being moved by the world and also the wish to get to see that call and response, which is interesting. It's important in Yuao Koyama's work. I didn't include it, but it's something I want to read further on. But like the world that calls us and we respond in a more relational view. So yeah, it's mainly because of the poetic and the aspect that I chose Norinaga, and also we're in Japan, so I thought why not include something Shinto.
That's interesting. You were talking about the song, right? And in Japanese, it read Buddha, right? And I was really actually wondering which kanji was that actually, because depending on the kanji, it can actually mean poetry, right? Instead of song. So I was really wondering. I guess it's the utau. I guess that's the kanji, but that was very interesting. Now that you're talking about poetry.
The second Buddha as poetry, that's to say and eternity.
Yeah.
Kanji.
Yeah. But I think even the utau can also be understood as poetry in a way, right? Yes, right? Yes.
Yes, but can I enter in this discussion? So the discussion today started from Joe and Luca, Platonist, the role of logos, what is logos, the word. And then now we arrive to Motoori Norinaga, Mono no Aware. And I ask, so I wonder, aware is an onomatopoeic sound. So aware has no meaning. It's simply a vocal expression of a feeling. Aware, appare, awaremu. So mononaware means of things. So which kind of logos is this? Yeah? And if for the poetic word, the origin of the poetic word is in mono no aware, as so. What is the relation between this onomatopoeic bodily expression of feelings and the word or the logos? In your opinion?
Well, because it's, but I think the more when, well, it's wisdom wants to be loved by human beings, and she says it's the love aspect is the poetic and the more the emotional, because the 8th chapter is very emotionally laden. It's very, well, for that time, erotical, nearly, I think. So yeah, that's not the technological reason of making technological innovations, but more the wisdom that is also connected with law. Of course, philosophy is in Plato, Eros. It's also, but it's a more well, yeah, it's yeah, I don't know if I can't really give an answer, I think. So, but yeah, it just feels more emotionally charged, the wisdom that the Old Testament speaks about than the Greek wisdom, but that's just a feeling.
Does Warrior have a kind of elegiac overtone as well?
Yes, I guess.
Because I always think of lacrimae, Virgil, lacrimae, ventum, mortalia, but it would be something like wonder as well, wonder of creation. So and you can do a kind of phenomenological grounding of the whole idea of wisdom. It might begin with just human beings' wonder at creation. By the way, Jim, the desire of God can be an argument for the existence of God.
Yes.
There's a Russian theologian called Viktor Nesmelov, who lived from 1863 to 1937. And I read an article on him where he begins by saying religion is all projection, very far back in. Then halfway through, he does a kind of a pivot and he says, the very desire of God is an argument for the existence. Kind of turning far back on his head.
Isn't that also something Peirce writes about in his one of the last pieces, the neglected argument for God, that just the wish to think about God is an argument for God? So
Could I ask a real simple question? It's about your title. When I first saw the title, Self-Revelation of Creation, I thought, oh, that's really neat. And then I started to think about it. What's the difference between self-revelation and phenomenon? I mean, basically, they mean the same thing. In other words, it's observable, it's perceptible, maybe it's intelligible. And then I think, well, if I change the word to self-expression, I can say an artist expresses himself in a painting or in a sculpture. So this is like the self-expression, or if you will, a self-revelation in form and matter. But creation doesn't express itself outside of creation. So the only way it can show itself inside of creation is by being a phenomenon. In other words, it loses its meaning. In other words, it appears, it shows itself to us. Unless you want to say that there's something in creation, in this whole penultimate world we have, that reveals itself outside of the perceptible world. Well, you already said that we can't go there because we're stuck in the penultimate world.
well, we can go there, but there's within Christianity someone else who can come down here.
That would be different. The self-revelation of the ultimate.
There's
I would understand that, but creation, that's us. So we can't see ourselves expressed outside of. I just wonder if the word was something that attracted you, because it attracted me when I first saw it. When you stop to think about it, maybe it doesn't have so much content, unless I missed it completely.
And then the footnote the 20th century gave huge presence to revelation, it's a kind of central idea of theology. That has gone very much out of fashion. A lot of theologians like James Mackey, a friend of mine who died 5 years ago, were very skeptical about a revelation. And they said the only revelation is the cosmos. The cosmos is a place of grace and love. And I don't find that very satisfactory. Now, Jean-Luc Marion wrote a book recently called D'ailleurs la révélation. It means revelation from elsewhere. But Jean-Luc Marion does not like Luther. He does like Barth, and he doesn't like Luther, which seems to me a contradiction. In any case, he makes revelation phenomenality, givenness. Whereas for Barth and for Luther, revelation is from elsewhere in the stronger sense, that is the word of God spoken to us from the divine, from God, and incarnate in the self-emptying Christ, the hypnotic manifestation of God. This is all much stronger than what Marion says. You know? And also, Bonhoeffer talks, you make it sound as if Bonhoeffer says the ultimate is you very strongly identified as justification by faith. But I think that's a bit misleading too, because if the ultimate, I mean, if justification by faith is the doctrine by which the church stands or falls, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a full account of the ultimate. I mean, Luther was a very biblical fellow. I mean, he lectured on Genesis, right? And he's certainly aware of God's manifestation in creation and all those kind of things. So when he says justification by faith is the ultimate, he means the most essential nexus, the most essential pivot of salvation.
Mm.
But I would say a lot of what you said about wisdom would fit very neatly into Luther, into the broader vision of Luther. And I think Bonhoeffer is, if he said it like that, is perhaps being very, very narrow, maybe in some kind of debate of his time. Sorry?
Well, it's also fragments of his ethics. He died before he could finish it, and I did not go as deep into it as I should, because in the whole argument between the penultimate and the ultimate. So maybe there's a very, very strong Christological, maybe too Christological, but I should.
Could I suggest that if the penultimate, maybe the ethical, and Bonhoeffer, I'm only speaking now in a completely impressionistic way, but Bonhoeffer was a kind of monastic type, and he very much believed in ethics and good works, and he scoffed at cheap grace, which is a very, I think, unfortunate expression. I mean, grace by definition is not only cheap, it's completely free. So maybe in what you quoted, he's kind of aware that he's missing something, and he says, of course, what I'm talking about is only the penultimate. The ultimate would be justification by sola gratia and sola fide, and he would be fighting against himself. There'd be a quarrel between the penultimate and the ultimate within himself. I just told you a fictional history of Bonhoeffer's later years.
There is a shift in. I think he also mentions that there are dangerous aspects of his book, Nachfolge.
Yes.
So
discipleship.
Yes.
It's underlining the cost.
Yes. So I think he is indeed reacting to certain tendencies in that book, but since he was in prison for a lot of the time in his later years, I don't know in great detail what or how he would rewrite that book or what specifically he had in mind. Probably indeed the idea of cheap grace.
The ethics is a big book, right? I don't know it, but you said it's unfinished, but it's still in
6,
right?
It's a collection of a few essays, but not a complete book with a complete argument. No.
Well, when we were in seminary, the thrilling book, or at least disturbing book, was Bonhoeffer's letters and papers from prison. And often that was the only Bonhoeffer we knew. And Bonhoeffer's previous work as a theologian sort of disappeared. We never even heard of it. So do you know the letters and papers from prison? I mean,
Yes, probably the non-religious interpretation of the whole idea, but but I think it gives if you only read those documents, I don't think it gives a good impression about the nuances of his.
Sure.
I remember when Eberhard Bethke came to Chicago and we had a long discussion with him. He's the one who wrote the biography of Bonhoeffer, and he said exactly what you said, that the letters and papers were based upon a theory that had never been completed. And that you can see the holes in it, but you see the passion, the ethical concern, but the fundamental theology or ethic that he was trying to develop was incomplete. So the letters and papers are of historical interest, but not of much theological interest. The rest of his work, we read a little bit of the Nachfolge, that was
it would be very nice if you were to take up Bonhoeffer and finish his theology. What a
It would.
people that would be, you know?
That's an easy text.